Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. I decided on the topic for today's video for a couple of reasons. Firstly, in our monthly history news lives, we are often looking at articles that detail the frankly extraordinary sums of money that various printed and manuscript texts have managed to fetch at auction. Having read these reports, I began to think about what the most valuable book, or indeed books, in the entire world might be. Having had this thought, numerous possibilities started to run across my mind, but I found myself unable to pinpoint one for sure. And then I began to wonder if other people might be as curious and interested in this particular topic as I am. Well, I certainly hope so, as that is what I'm going to be talking about today. So, let's go in search of the most valuable text, or indeed texts, in the world. I think we need to begin with some caveats. When it comes to discussing the most valuable texts, we are going to be limited to those which remain extant and catalogued today. We know, for example, that texts have certainly been lost, whether they were damaged and then discarded following repeated use, or perhaps destroyed during some censoring book burning, or maybe during a conflict, as happened with the Great Library of Alexandria, or even during some other disaster, perhaps one that I may have made a video on that I can leave linked, such as the Great Fire of London, which, among many other things, destroyed the stock of the booksellers, who, as bad luck would have it, had stored their wares for safety in the basement of Old St Paul's Cathedral. In many cases, we don't even know what we lost, much less its value. It is also possible that there are texts secreted in some poorly catalogued archive, or perhaps in an attic or a basement somewhere, that may be rediscovered at some point and then valued at a sum that will eclipse the text we are about to look at now. However, even with the extant texts, there are issues with determining which is the most valuable. While most, if not all, texts held in both private collections and public collections will have been valued and often revalued for insurance purposes, the amount of coverage suggested for those items following that valuation is not customarily shared with the wider public. Indeed, confidentiality about the exact sums these texts have been valued at and insured for is usually a requirement of the insurance policy that covers them. And this leaves us in somewhat of a predicament, as we can, perhaps, only discuss the most expensive texts rather than the most valuable with anything approaching reliability. And we are dependent for that reliability on how texts have sold at auction. Now, on the plus side, auction sales do inform insurance valuations for similar items that have not recently been sold. It is, of course, debatable whether the auction marketplace will also broadly follow, or perhaps even influence, the value of all artefacts. Certainly, what makes a text valuable to an auction buyer will, in many cases, make it valuable to a curator of a public collection and also to a visitor to that collection too. Because whether we're considering value or expense, a given text will be looked at in relation to, among other things, its rarity, its quality, both in terms of craftsmanship but also preservation, whether that text is historically significant and to what degree. If it was written by a famous and sought-after author, that's going to raise the price, as will any evidence that it was previously owned by someone well known. Some texts may be especially prized if they contain interesting or significant annotations or marginalia. So while it's not totally perfect, I'm going to be using auction records to compile today's list of the world's top 15 most valuable books. I'm also going to use Coin News's US inflation calculator to adjust the sums fetched to what they would be worth in today's money, even though the item may fetch more or indeed less if it were to be auctioned today. And I'm going to do this in an attempt to compare like with like. So, for example, as we're going to see as we look at the list, an item that sold in 1983 for nearly $12 million is more expensive than something that sold for just over $21 million in 2007, or at least it is when we adjust for inflation. However, with that being said, a mark of how potentially imperfect and difficult it's going to be to determine the most expensive or valuable text in the world can be exemplified by this book, John James Audubon's The Birds of America. This is a 19th century collection of over 400 hand-coloured illustrations of more than 1,000 life-size birds. There are believed to be no more than 15 surviving copies of this text today. When a first edition of this work was auctioned in 2010, it went for $11.5 million, which would be nearly $17 million when adjusted for inflation today. And that would place this text firmly in our top 15 for this video. In fact, it would put this text at number 11. However, when another complete first edition of this work was auctioned more recently, in 2018, it sold for $9.65 million. If we adjust for inflation, that comes to just over $12.3 million today. This later 2018 auction result, when adjusted for inflation, renders this text as less expensive than the text currently sitting at number 15, and so technically beyond the parameters of our list for today. The text that sits at number 15 is this one. And right off the bat, I'm going to say that this was one of the texts that flashed across my mind when first considering this topic. If anything, I am perhaps a little surprised that it's not in the top 10. I am talking about this copy of William Shakespeare's Comedies, Histories and Tragedies, published according to the true original copies, 1623. So, in short, a First Folio. This First Folio sold for $9.978 million, and that's including the buyer's premium. It sold at Christie's on the 14th of October 2020. When we adjust for inflation using the same calculator, that comes to $12,367,683.41 today in 2025. Now, I do have a video on the First Folio that I will leave linked, but briefly, the First Folio was compiled and published in 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare's death. It was put together by his friends and colleagues, John Hemmings and Henry Condell, and they are the signatories for this dedicatory epistle that appears towards the start of the First Folio. We believe there were around 750 copies of the First Folio printed, 235 of which are known to survive, and of that number, just 56 are said to be complete copies. This 2020 lot was won through a telephone bid made by Stephen Lowenthal, an American book dealer and antiquarian. Editing cat here. A week ago from when this video will premiere, there was a very rare auction lot up for sale. 4 Shakespeare folios. So this was the 1623 First Folio, along with the 1632 Second Folio, the 1663 Third Folio, which just happens to contain 7 extra plays, and the 1685 Fourth Folio, all being sold as one single lot. Now, as this is 4 texts as one single lot, I'm wondering whether it should even be included in this particular video, because it won't be clear, I think, which book is worth what, assuming, of course, the lot even fetches enough as 4 books. At the moment, the amount this lot sold for has not been announced. In at 14 on this list, we have the complete Babylonian Talmud, the written version of Jewish law, accompanied by a commentary by rabbinical scholars. This version was compiled and printed in the early decades of the 16th century by Daniel Bomberg, a Christian scholar and printer who specialised in Hebrew texts. He was born in Antwerp but would set up his press in Venice. Only 14 copies of this edition are known to survive. It sold for $8.1 million, plus the buyer's premium, which brought the total cost up to $9.3 million at Sotheby's in December 2015. When we adjust for inflation, that comes to nearly $12.6 million. As with the First Folio mentioned previously, in this case as well, the buyer was Stephen Lowenthal. It is thought, though, that he was acting as a proxy buyer, and that this Babylonian Talmud was purchased on behalf of Leon Black, who is described as a private equity baron. At 13, we have Giacomo Casanova's Histoire de ma vie, the history of my life. This 3,700-page manuscript was produced in the last decades of the 18th century by Casanova himself, and it was thought to have been destroyed during the Allied bombing of Dresden at the start of 1945. Fortunately, though, it had in fact been relocated to a safe just a few days earlier and thus survived. This manuscript was purchased by the French National Library in a private sale for €7 million. That is $9.06 million in February of 2010. When adjusted for inflation, that comes to just over $13.3 million. 12. Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, which, although it was seemingly left incomplete, apparently due to the author's death, still sits at more than 17,000 lines. In this work, a gaggle of pilgrims take part in a storytelling contest as they travel together to a shrine. A first edition of this work, printed by William Caxton in 1477, was auctioned by Christie's in 1998. The lot was reportedly won by Sir Paul Getty for £4.6 million, or $7.5 million. When adjusted for inflation, this comes to just over $14.76 million. According to Reader's Digest, this, quote, rare book is currently housed in the library of Getty's Wormsley estate in Buckinghamshire, England. 11. The Gutenberg Bible. Printed in around 1545, this was the first book produced on the Gutenberg press. It is believed that 150 copies were published originally, but that less than 50 are known to survive today, and only around half of that number are believed to be complete editions. It was sold in 1987, during what the Los Angeles Times described as a, quote, rapid-fire, tense bidding at auction. This copy sold for $4.9 million at Christie's, with commission bringing the total up to $5.39 million. When adjusted for inflation, that comes to just over $15.2 million. 10. The Rothschild Prayer Book. This is an illuminated manuscript Book of Hours, which is a devotional or prayer book. It is in Latin and on vellum. This copy was produced in Ghent or Bruges in around 1505 to 1510, and it was auctioned by Christie's in 2014, where it went for a total of $13.605 million. When adjusted for inflation, that comes to just over $18.4 million. It was subsequently revealed that the successful buyer in this case was the Australian billionaire Kerry Stokes. 9. The Bay Psalm Book. Famous for being the first book to be printed in what would become the United States of America. It was printed by Stephen Day in 1640. At the time, around 1,700 copies of this 300-page text, described on the title page as, quote, the whole book of Psalms, faithfully translated into English metre, whereunto is prefixed a discourse declaring not only the lawfulness, but also the necessity of the heavenly ordinance of singing scripture psalms in the churches of God. Derek Dreher, the director of Philadelphia's Rosenbach Library, which also holds a rare copy of the Bay Psalm Book, told BBC News that, quote, it's a book that was not created to be fancy or splendid or valuable in any other way than the significance of its content. But because the congregation for which it was created literally used the book to death, very few copies have survived. Sotheby's auctioned a Bay Psalm book in 2013. It generated $14.16 million. When we adjust for inflation, that comes to nearly $19.5 million today. 8. St Cuthbert Gospel, a 7th century manuscript copy of the Gospel of St John, which was purchased by the British Library in 2012 following a fundraising campaign that generated the required £9 million, or $14.3 million. When we adjust for inflation, that comes to just over $19.98 million. This manuscript has been digitised, with the expectation that it would be publicly available. However, access to this digitised copy is currently compromised in the aftermath of that devastating cyber attack on the British Library, which took place in 2023. 7. Northumberland Bestiary, an illuminated manuscript that was produced in England in around 1250 to 1260, which was purchased by the Getty Museum in 2007. The catalogue entry describes it as, quote, a collection of descriptions and images of real and imaginary animals, intended to provide readers with moral lessons. Although bestiaries were a kind of medieval encyclopedia of animals, they explored the world of animals primarily in order to explain their significance within the Christian worldview. Male lions were seen as worthy reflections of God the Father, for example, while the dragon was understood as a representative of Satan on Earth. The Getty Museum reportedly paid $20 million for this manuscript. When we adjust that for inflation, it comes to more than $30.9 million. 6. Magna Carta, the text that is credited with setting out the laws which the king, then the monarch King John, and everyone else had to follow for the first time. This great charter was reissued by John's son, Edward. The one we are talking about now is one that was reissued by King Edward I in 1297. This coincided with Magna Carta being confirmed in Parliament. Magna Carta thus became law at the point that this version was produced. It was sold by Sotheby's in 2007. The New York Times reported that it was purchased by, quote, David M. Rubenstein, a Washington lawyer and founder of the Carlyle Group, a large private equity firm. Mr. Rubenstein said he bought the charter, the last privately owned copy of the Magna Carta, because he wanted it to stay at the National Archives and Records Administration in Washington, where it has been on display since 1988. He paid $21.32 million. When we adjust for inflation, that comes to $32,985,836.93. Magna Carta was in the news more recently, as it was announced that a copy, purchased in 1946 by Harvard Law School for $27.50, which, when we adjust for inflation, comes to $452.40, was misidentified at the time and is in fact an original of King Edward I's confirmation of Magna Carta in 1300, meaning it is almost certainly worth considerably more than was first believed. 5. The Gospels of Henry the Lion, commissioned by Henry, Duke of Saxony, for production at the Benedictine Abbey of Helmershausen in the late 12th century. It is a more than 450-page manuscript version of the four Gospels, with richly coloured illuminations that are accented in gold leaf. It is described as, quote, the greatest masterpiece of Romanesque book illumination in northern Germany, as one of the most magnificent and richly decorated illuminated manuscripts of the Middle Ages. It remains exceptional to this day. It was auctioned by Sotheby's in 1983 and was purchased by the German government, who were then represented by Hermann Abs, who was at the time the 82-year-old honorary president of Deutsche Bank. $11.7 million was paid. When we adjust for inflation, that comes to $37,683,750. Today, the Gospels of Henry the Lion are held by the Herzog August Bibliothèque in Wolfenbüttel. A high-resolution digital copy is available online, and I will leave a link to that in the description box. 4. The Codex Cassissoon, described in The Guardian as, quote, a leather-bound, handwritten parchment volume containing a nearly complete Hebrew Bible. It is thought to date to around the year 900, making it one of the world's oldest surviving biblical manuscripts. It was auctioned by Sotheby's in 2023 and was purchased by Alfred H. Moses, the former US ambassador to Romania. He was acting on behalf of the American Friends of ANU. It was then donated to ANU Museum of the Jewish People in Tel Aviv. It cost $38.1 million. When we adjust for inflation, That comes to just over $40 million. 3. The Sherborn Missile. This was produced around the start of the 15th century at Sherborn Abbey in Dorset. It is reportedly the largest and most elaborately decorated liturgical text or service book to survive intact following the dissolution of the monasteries during the English Reformation. It was purchased by the British Library in 1998 from Ralph Percy, 12th Duke of Northumberland, at a cost of $21.21 million. When we adjust for inflation, that comes to more than $41.7 million today. This missile has also been digitised by the British Library, but again, access is currently disrupted in the aftermath of that cyber attack. 2. The Book of Mormon, specifically the handwritten printer's copy that dates to 1830. This was transferred in a private sale in 2017, when the Community of Christ sold it to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for $35 million. When we adjust for inflation, that comes to more than $45.8 million today. In at number 1, and topping our list for today, we have the Codex Leester, also known as the Codex Hammer. This is so far the most expensive text when we adjust for inflation. It is comprised of 36 sheets, and thus makes 72 manuscript pages in total. Upon these pages, Leonardo da Vinci noted down his thoughts and research on the natural world through his writings and sketches between 1504 and 1510. Some examples of the kinds of questions that this manuscript explores include: why is the sky blue? How are the mountains formed? What caused the circulation of the Earth's waters? Why were fossils found at high altitude? And so on. It was purchased during an auction at Christie's in 1994 by Bill Gates for $30.8 million. When we adjust for inflation, that comes to $66,669,946.02. It has been made frequently available for public exhibition, various publications, educational activities, and for research. A text comprising facsimile pages of this document, alongside transcriptions and analysis, is available through archive.org. I will link to that resource in the description box. So, what do you think? Did any of the texts that we looked at today surprise you by being so expensive? Were there any texts that you expected to be on this list that ultimately weren't? If you tell me what you had in mind, maybe I could look into how much some of those are valued at, or how much we think they're valued at, for a future video. Let me know what you think of that as an idea. As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comment section underneath this video. I'd also love it if you could pop an emoji or a social glyph in the comments too, because that will boost the engagement, which hopefully gets the video shared out more, which in turn should help us to grow our community. I think we have to pick something manuscripty or booky, something text-based. But if you could explain in the comment why you've picked that emoji, that would be really helpful, because I have been reliably informed that the algorithm pixies do prefer words to emojis on their own. So if you could help me out that way, that would be great. You can find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to the other places you can find me on the internet in my description box. So please do follow me over on some or all of those so we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please share it with your friends. If you like my channel, let some pals know about it. You can tell me about this video in particular by hitting the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel, and if you think you are subscribed, have a check just to make sure you don't be mysteriously unsubscribed against your will. And while you are there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, please do hit the bell icon beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down that will appear. And that way YouTube claim they will tell you when I've next uploaded, but also when I'm next going live, which I'm doing currently once a month to talk about the history news. Lots of you lovely people send me in news items from the preceding month. I put them together, and then we sit down for around about 2.5 hours, although, to be honest, that number is creeping up month on month, and we talk about what has been in the news. It is a good time. You aren't going to want to miss it. We have, of course, got our failsafe. Head to my website. I will leave that linked. It is www.katrinamarchant.com. If you head to the contact page, you will see this little box. Put your email address in that box, and then hit sign up. That will add you to my list and will let me send you out an email once a week to let you know what I've been up to, but also to send you useful links for my content for the coming days. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.